Orem mutilates and kills animals as part of the federal grant gravy train. For animals who have no voice, Frankenstein lives. Here in these laboratories, John Orem has spent close to $1 million taxpayer dollars in experiments inflicting sleep deprivation and punishment on cats. Claiming to be studying human sleep disorders, Orem has removed parts of the cat's skulls, cut holes in their windpipes, into which he implanted electrodes, and in his early days forced them to stay awake for fear of drowning by making them balance on planks in a 55-gallon water-filled drum. Orem inserted surgical steel stitches into some cats' eyelids and sank electrodes into their skulls. This is Selby, one cat the Animal Liberation Front found on a reconnaissance raid. He has an electrode in his head and was so terrified of humans that he hid in his cage and refused to be touched and held, even to take food. Dr. Suzanne Cliver, an experienced veterinarian familiar with this case, had this to say: "I found Orem's work among the most ghastly I have read. The gross insensitivity to the animals used is a profound embarrassment to the scientific community. Orem used these machines to implant screws into the cat's skulls and to monitor their brain waves. Bolts were inserted into the skulls of the cats, and the animals were then screwed into this metal restraint device, staying there sometimes for 8 hours. This diagram was taken from one of Orem's own publications. You can see how a tube has been inserted into the cat's throat while he was restrained in this stereotaxic device. A hole has been cut across the supporting cartilages of the neck, and a tube has been inserted into the cat's windpipe to allow the experimenter to completely cut off the cat's air supply. This cat had an infected hole in his throat where a tube had been implanted. Here, Orem has cats screwed into a stereotaxic device while tied into a restraint bag. The cat cannot move without ripping the electrode out of his brain. In some experiments, cats were restrained in this way for a minimum of 2 8-hour sessions. A wire connects the cat's brain to electronic recording devices. Orem conducts his experiments while the cats are awake and not anesthetized, placing the cats in body bags so that they cannot move or struggle. The electrode implant will connect this cat to Orem's electrical equipment. As Ingrid Newkirk, the National Director of People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, said, Orem turns cats into electrical appliances that you can plug into a socket. Now that the cat has been immobilized and bolted into the steel restraint device, she will be subjected to Orem's painful series of training experiments. To persuade cats not to breathe, Orem blasts ammonium hydroxide, a painful, irritating substance, into their eyes when they fail to stop breathing at the sound of a tone. Here you can see that every time the tone is sounded, the trained cat winces, unable to move her head, and shuts her eyes in fear of receiving a blast of ammonium hydroxide. In one experiment, although the cat stopped breathing, she then took a small breath before the onset of the tone. As a result, she was punished. For the cats, the final result of these experiments is death. The brains of the cats Orem has preserved are displayed in his office. You can see that one jar is marked Lady. These cats, filmed in a reconnaissance visit, had been killed before the ALF returned. According to the Animal Liberation Front, Floyd, one of the 5 cats taken from the animal lab and placed in a loving home, was found with one leg missing as a result of an experimental, quote, accident, an indentation in his skull where electrodes had been implanted, an infected hole in his neck where a breathing control tube had been inserted, and his sinuses had been stripped by ammonium hydroxide blasts. Floyd, now renamed Chester, is reported to be doing well in a loving home. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, the only federal agency responsible for enforcing animal protection laws, has cited Texas Tech for 43 violations of the Animal Welfare Act from July 86 through December 88. These reports were obtained by PETA through the Federal Freedom of Information Act. USDA inspectors write, cage too small. The size of the adult cat causes him not to turn and move freely. And inspectors found outdated drugs used at their own risk. Although no such claims were made before the expose, Orem and Texas Tech administrators now claim that Orem's cat experiments are aimed at studying sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS, the leading cause of death for infants aged 1 week to 1 year. Pediatrician Kenneth Stoller tells a different story.
After a review of Orem's research over the last 15 years, I can say that he is no SIDS researcher. In fact, I have not found anything practical coming from his research, and Orem himself has indicated that his data is not relevant outside his lab. As a pediatrician, I have dealt firsthand with the devastation of SIDS. It is very bothersome to see it that a scientist would use this disease to exploit the public and perform cruel experiments.
Mothers of babies that died of SIDS are speaking out. Diandrea Darrell of New York City had this to say, "My baby was gentle and loving. How dare anyone use her death as an excuse to procure large sums of money to torture defenseless animals?"